When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Skims or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/income.
Hi everyone, I'm Deb Flaschenberg. Welcome to Yoga, Birth, Babies, a podcast produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. We will be diving into everything prenatal yoga, birth, and baby related, hoping to inspire, educate, and empower you through your journey into motherhood. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Deb Flaschenberg, and I'm your host of Yoga Birth Babies. And today we're going to talk about planning for postpartum. It is so common to put a lot of thought and effort and study into pregnancy and in birth, which are important, but then kind of winging it postpartum. So to talk about planning for postpartum, I have a wonderful midwife, Elaine Keller-Duemig. She is a certified nurse midwife and owner of Central Park Midwifery, a private midwifery practice in Manhattan that attends hospital births. Elaine earned her bachelor's degree in women's studies and a certificate in LGBT studies from University of Wisconsin-Madison. And she earned her nursing degree from Quinnipiac University and has a midwifery master's degree from Columbia University. And prior to midwifery, she worked as a labor and delivery and postpartum nurse in several hospitals. So Elaine has a lot of knowledge. Central Park Midwifery, where she owns, is the only midwife-owned practice in Manhattan and was established in 2014. So for over 10 years, she's been in Manhattan working with new and expectant parents. So Elaine has a lot to share about how to create a postpartum plan. So some of the things we talk about healing and rest for the birthing person, how to set up support for this healing and rest, what kind of supplies you need as a new parent. We talk all about breastfeeding and lactation and what baby prep looks like. Here's a big one that I think pretty much anyone can benefit from. We talk about setting boundaries around visits from family and friends. We talk about relationship prep because your relationship is bound to change, as well as not losing touch with yourself as a person. More. We have so much more we talk about, but that's just an idea of all the things that you want to think about as you prepare for postpartum. So I'm excited for you to hear Elaine's list, and we really flesh out a lot of these ideas. So if you have a pen and paper free or you're a computer kind of person, I would say take some time, listen to some of these thoughts so that you can start to establish the support that will best serve you when your baby arrives. Now, before we get to my conversation with Elaine, here we are, we're back in the school year. I can't believe we're back into our early fall prenatal yoga teacher training. Things are going. We've had some schedule changes, some new teachers. So I'm really excited about all that's happening at Prenatal Yoga Center. You can check out the new teachers on the schedule in person and online. We have a new workshop, Body Ready Birth with Ellen Gary. So much going on at PYC. Check all that out on our website, prenatalyogacenter.com. And as I mentioned, we are already into our year of teacher trainings. And as having school-age kids, I think of everything from September to June in the school year. And we started our early fall prenatal yoga teacher training. And then we have a late fall, a winter, and an in-person New York City training in March and April. And then we finish it off with with a May postnatal teacher training. So a lot of our stuff's online. And what's really fun about that is that we get to have people from all over the world participate in these teacher trainings. And then they bring this support to their communities. So we're spreading the love. So if you are someone interested in teaching prenatal yoga, again, check all that out on our website. One request I have of you is if you can leave a rating and review for the podcast, it's going to help people find us. And then all that we offer will just continue to grow. So I want to thank you ahead of time for doing so. And speaking of thanks, as always, thanks for being part of our community. We're going to take a super quick break and enjoy my conversation with Elaine. Hi, Elaine. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. I am really excited to talk to you about postpartum prep because I feel like it gets forgotten so much. But before we get into that, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you. I feel like Central Park Midwifery has been around the corner from PYC forever, and we've really never connected. So I'm excited to get to know you. And also just curious about what led you into birth work.
Sure. Yeah, I know it's crazy how close in proximity we are, and yet there hasn't been like a personal kind of connection.
Yeah.
So I have been a midwife since 2010, but I was interested in birth work from a very pretty young age. Like in high school, I started to be interested in obstetrics and gynecology. I'm not sure like if it was like a love for caring for others or like just like women's health and OBGYN stuff. But I didn't know what a midwife was. So, I sort of said, I'm going to take the path of becoming an OBGYN. And when I was in my first year of college and undergrad, I went to University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I'm from Wisconsin as well. I took a women's studies class about women's health and learned that midwifery was a thing that was not dated and that still existed. And basically immediately changed my path to nursing. I was not the best student when I was in my early 20s. So I actually didn't end up going to nursing school in Wisconsin. So I graduated with a degree in women's studies and a certificate in LGBT studies is what it was called at the time, and very different than now. That was in 2005. And I applied to nursing schools. Actually, before I did that, I became a nursing assistant, and then went to nursing school at Quinnipiac in Connecticut. Just left Wisconsin for good, and then graduated, became a labor and delivery nurse, and then applied for midwifery school and went to Columbia. So it's been a long journey of these 3 degrees on this path to get here. But I've been in this journey now, in OBGYN just in general, since I was out of nursing school. When I worked as a floor nurse, I worked as a labor and delivery and postpartum nurse. So I've been doing that since 2007.
So you've been in it for almost 2 decades. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. That makes me feel old. Yes.
Well,
yes.
If it helps you, I've been doing Prenatal Yoga Center just hit its 22nd birthday. So if that makes you feel better, I'm older than you. And we learn how to support people in the birth world with our age. I like to
Totally.
So, all right. So I love all the birth work you did, but we're going to shift a little bit because this comes up so often in class that people are super focused about preparing for their birth, which I love and I absolutely support. And then they, of course, take the classes of caring for newborn. Again, love that. And they're learning how to take care of their baby. But I feel like the postpartum prep for the new parents is pretty forgotten. So where should someone start when they're creating their postpartum plan? Because I'm guessing as a midwife, you also work with people postpartum and probably see a lot of kind of the catch up on the other side.
Yeah, for sure. So I definitely agree with what you're saying. While pregnancy and birth is really important, I think that the focus for even our clients, a lot of them is like mostly just like around buying things and like setting up the nursery and hours of research on which stroller to use and that kind of stuff. And honestly, postpartum and what we call the fourth trimester, basically the time from the delivery until 3 to 4 months postpartum, is really forgotten and missed. So, yeah, I definitely agree. There needs to be like a bigger shift on that. And so, I think also parts that are lost in this are like preparation for people's own care and healing after they have a baby, how their relationship is going to be affected, and also expectations around that time, and also feeding your baby and baby sleep. Those are things that all kind of don't get studied as much or prepared for. So I would recommend, I actually highly recommend like a fourth trimester class, or a postpartum preparation class, or at least like reading books and like getting yourself into maybe even a group, like a pregnancy support group that then goes beyond into postpartum, or something like in your classes, even at the Prenatal Yoga Center, like taking classes during pregnancy to get to know people in your cohort so that you have those people then beyond as well. So newborn classes about how to take care of the baby, how to watch their sleep, what their sleeping is going to look like, that kind of stuff would be important. Also, finding a supportive pediatrician is going to be helpful in your journey. When you want to do that while you're pregnant, right? Find somebody who you can go to, a few days later. And infant sleep, I think, is something people don't really think that much about. And I don't know that it's the most important. I mean, everything is important, but infant sleep preparation and like where your baby's going to sleep or how that's going to look, kind of learning about like how much sleep babies need and that kind of thing. Setting up expectations for care of the birthing person and also the family, how your visitors are going to be, or are they going to be visitors, or are they going to be helpers? How are people going to help you? And also like planning ahead for the relationship dynamics and self-awareness and like how that's going to how your world basically is going to change afterwards. And that's really hard to always know until you get there. People can tell you it's going to be hard or it's going to be fine or whatever they're going to tell you, but it's still important to talk about it,
Well,
talk
this
about
is a great list. So let's start to now kind of hash out. So this is good. So this is helping. You totally answered my question of like creating your postpartum plans. So those listening, we can jot down these ideas, but let's now take several of them and just flesh them out more. One of the things you said pretty early on was about the healing and rest for the birthing person. So I want to dive into that. So as a midwife, you've seen people birth and you see people on the healing side. So will you share a little bit about the typical physical state of a parent who had a vaginal birth and then that of who had a cesarean? Because I think too much on social media, we're like, I had a baby, boom, I'm back to how I was. Like, it's not just, a few days later, you just are back running around. So what do you typically see? We'll talk about the mental state in a little bit, but what's the physical state that most parents are in? Talking about kind of also setting up expectations and then also how to create healing for that time.
Sure. I mean, I think both a vaginal and a cesarean birth can be really more physically taxing on people's bodies than they think. And there can be people who have a very, very difficult vaginal birth and healing and recovery that might be even more challenging than somebody who had a cesarean. Sometimes people think cesarean, oh my gosh, a surgery, but a vaginal birth can be pretty trying as well, depending on the person. But
yeah, my first birth was crazy long, and it was physically, I had a lot of healing from that. Yeah. So I agree.
Right. But, people think, oh, I had a vaginal birth, so I'm just going to go out and like go for a walk and I'm going to be doing my normal things. Most people are doing too much. And we in our practice, and I think a lot of other midwives are saying the same thing, we tell people really to rest. It's not that your activity is going to harm you per se, but it might make your recovery longer and less smooth overall.
Mm-hmm.
An example in the world, I once saw this person who was not my client, who had a baby and had walked a mile to drop off her older child while wearing her baby, and then walked that mile home at like 1 or 2 weeks postpartum.
Full on the
And
pelvic floor.
right. I was just floored. But, no, that person didn't get advice from their OBGYN that they shouldn't be doing that. You're basically just told, like, it's fine. You had a vaginal birth. It was uncomplicated. But it is really important, even if you feel really physically pretty great, maybe you feel really great, you should still try to rest as much as possible, at least for a week or two. So, what we tell people is you want to try to rest and be horizontal, mostly horizontal for at least the first week. That means lying on the bed or lying on the couch, spending most of your time in that kind of restful position, not doing chores, not doing even easy things like folding laundry. Like everything is like focused on rest and your own recovery. Once you start feeling like a little bit better, and that might take even 2 or 3 weeks, right? But start taking it gradually. Walk maybe just outside and like to the end of the block and back. But even walking 1 block means getting out the door, walking a block and walking back. And that can be a lot for the postpartum body, whether it be vaginal or cesarean. What I think also is said often is like your recovery will take 6 weeks when you have a vaginal birth and 8 weeks when you have a cesarean. And that's really related to disability paperwork, to be honest. It's actually related to like how much time you actually are cleared by your insurance. But it's important for people to know that it might take a little longer to fully feel that, no matter who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And overall, we just think like the more recovery and rest you can have in the beginning, the more overall you'll be feeling kind of back to normal. Your bleeding will be stopping. Your pelvic floor will be feeling stronger. All of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I wish I had heeded the advice of my midwife and everyone else when they told me to rest more, because I didn't rest well. And I think it prolonged my recovery. And I see that a lot. I see people showing up in postnatal like 2 or 3 weeks later, and I have to, like after their birth, and I have to pull the whole class back for them because I know it's not going to serve them as well. So what kind of support can someone set up ahead of time to help their healing and their rest?
Sure. Hold on. I have to just adjust something. So.
Okay.
Okay. So setting up your space ahead of time can be really helpful. In the hospital, you have this little, if you give birth in a hospital, you have a little bedside table. And that's where you keep all your things. You can create little tables or little spaces on your nightstand for your water, your snacks, your supplies, your pumping things, like your anything you might need, nipple creams, things like that. So you can put that in like a little basket or however, and set up those little stations. I always suggest like comfortable spaces where you can be horizontal, right? So again, kind of where you can lie down, having extra pillows around, what might make your bed more comfortable if you're sitting up a lot, right? Maybe one of those like seated pillows. Setting up support people ahead of time. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but just like who's going to be the one who's making meals, cleaning, doing laundry, things like that, which will help the birthing person rest. Also helpful physically, like having several sets of sheets. One person I know, and I've always continued to advise this, said get dark sheets, a dark color, just in case there's, blood or whatever that gets on them. But having several sets is really helpful, and comfortable clothes and pajamas and robes. Maybe I always liked wearing hoodies because they were easy to get on and off and easy for breastfeeding.
These are some
And
great suggestions. Thank you. I love the hoodie
sure.
idea.
Yeah, no, the hoodie was like key for me. I don't know. I wore hoodies all the time because you also, when you're postpartum, especially if you're lactating, but even if you're not, you have ups and downs in your heat, right? So you might be cold and then you're hot, and it's easy to get them on and off. Um, and actually, one really big thing is if you have pets, particularly if you have dogs, who is going to take care of those dogs? Consider actually getting a dog walker or somebody who can come and take care of your dog, especially if they're a high needs walking dog. Because obviously the birthing person, I've been telling you, right, it should be resting, hopefully is resting. But that means that the partner might have to take your dog out a million times a day, long walks or whatever. That means that they're not going to be as present for the birthing person. So anything that's going to support the family is really important too. So like pets, you might think, oh, well, if I have a partner, my partner's going to do that. But then that takes away your partner from helping take care of you and your baby.
This is really helpful. So you talked about some supplies. Is there anything else that the parents should have? I love the idea, like the little stations, like your little side tables. What other supplies? Actually, one I'm going to throw out that just popped in my head. I remember having a Perry bottle. Is that what it's called? The little water bottle
Mm-hmm.
to pee. So what other supplies should new parents have at home just to help them physically and we'll say also mentally?
Yeah. I mean, well, on the same line as the Perry bottle, if you're giving birth in a hospital, you will get like a standard Perry bottle. So that's something that you don't necessarily have to buy, though there are nicer ones that people do like to buy. But toileting kind of supplies, right? And again, if you're giving birth in a hospital, a lot of times you go home with a lot of this stuff, but that would be pads, different types of pads, right? Sometimes people just have one kind of pad on hand, but actually, when you're bleeding and postpartum, we tell you make sure you change your pad every time you go to the bathroom. So you're not going to be wanting to wear the heaviest pads at 3 weeks or postpartum when you're having some spotting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, everything from liners to adult diapers, having that on hand. And that will be helpful when you're still pregnant also, to be honest, because you never know when your water might break or when you're having a lot of discharge or things. So it's good to have pads of all sizes. But also don't overbuy them, because this is the thing. You will go home with a lot of that if you're giving birth in a hospital. Sometimes people make pads with ice, or they buy them, or somebody named them padsicles, which is just basically frozen pads that might have things like witch hazel and maybe some essential oils. You can make them. There's recipes on the internet for this kind of thing. And you can also buy pre-made ones now. Although you and I did not have that. We had to make our own.
Yeah. You said that and I'm like, wow, have I been in the birth world and I have not heard there's pre-made ones? I'm like, that is a business idea I should have come up with.
100%. Yes. And you can make those ahead of time. However, again, you don't know how your birth is going to go, and don't overdo it, because, even if you do have a cesarean that was unexpected, then you're not going to really use those. Lots of protein rich snacks, nuts and trail mix, like protein bars. Maybe even if you're not a huge eater, you might want protein shakes, things like that. Protein is really important for your healing and for if you're lactating, and just giving you energy, right? And keeping you full. I like having water bottles with straws and also a large capacity, because nobody wants to take an 8-ounce bottle and have to fill it up 1,000 times. Like get not maybe those gigantic ones, but a big one with a straw. Preparing frozen meals. People talk about this all the time. My favorite was somebody told me to make breakfast burritos, which I did. And it was really great. Let me just say, breakfast burritos freeze well. Having, I don't know. And having over-the-counter medications. So typically ibuprofen and Tylenol. When you're pregnant, you can't take ibuprofen. You shouldn't take ibuprofen. So you might not have that on hand. But that's kind of really good thing for postpartum. Even with vaginal cesarean, doesn't matter. It's the best thing, kind of anti-inflammatory. Aleve would be kind of in the same class. Also having Miralax, that's kind of a stool softener helpful.
Yeah, that first
for
poop.
your
Do you
bowel
want to just,
movement.
for those that haven't been there, just give a little glimpse about, a little conversation about the first poop postpartum.
I mean, everybody's really concerned about the first bowel movement, but to be honest, most people are surprised it's not that big of a deal, even if they have
I
a
was so
tear.
concerned
You
because it
know,
didn't feel great. At least I'm going to put that out there for the world to know. It didn't feel great.
I think it just depends on if you had a lot of tearing, how your pushing went, if you had
Yeah,
hemorrhoids
I think it was all the pushing that I was like, oh no,
right.
what's going to go on with my pelvic floor? I know we
But
share a
it's
lot
not
here.
a bad, yeah, of course, but it's not a bad thing to have your stool just be easier to come out no matter what, right?
Yeah.
And so Miralax is one thing that, like, again, in the hospital, basically everybody gets offered doses of that before they go home. So it can be good to have that on hand. And then, just actually, I think it's really important to put together all the furniture and things you need and familiarize yourself with use, right? I can't tell you how many times I've seen people who have not put together their breast pump because they're planning on nursing at the breast. And then maybe that doesn't work out. And now they don't have a pump, maybe, or they haven't put it together. They have no idea how to use it. They have a crying baby who they're trying to hold while they're also trying to pump and their partner doesn't know. And anyway, long story, put everything together, test it out, check it out, know how to use it.
This is a great list. Okay, I want to start talking about preparing for breastfeeding or lactation or baby feeding, but we're going to take a super quick break. When we come back, I know that's a big topic, so we'll jump right into that. We'll be right back. Okay, so we are back. So what would breastfeeding or lactation or just baby feeding prep look like?
Well, first thing I always say again is if you can find a class to take about lactation or breastfeeding if you're planning to breastfeed, or at least like reading books and watching YouTube. Oh my gosh, there's so many YouTube videos about how to have a good latch and things like that are actually really useful. My other favorite thing is to make a short list of IBCLCs. An IBCLC is an international board certified lactation consultant. And these are people who are highly trained and skilled in helping people with lactation. Breastfeeding, of course, but also even increasing supply, other types of issues that are related to lactating. But what's really great is if you have a small list of these people ahead of time. And if it's a time that's really busy, like summer, I actually go so far as to tell people, maybe you want to reach out to a couple of the people on your short list to see if they're going to be available, because people travel and they might not take people for a whole month at a time, right?
That's
So
smart.
having a list of people on standby that, you don't necessarily have to have a lactation consultant that's lined up for sure, but just having that short list can be so helpful. And it's a thing that's pretty easy for you to do while you're pregnant and really hard for you to do when you are struggling postpartum.
Mm-hmm. That's important. All right, let's talk about my favorite topic here, boundaries with family and friends, because my husband and I had a serious conversation about this. I'm so glad that my in-laws don't listen to this, but about his side. So what are your suggestions on setting boundaries around visits with family and friends?
First and foremost, have a discussion with your partner before you have your baby about what you both think and get on the same page. Then discuss your expectations about who should be coming, when they're coming, where they're going to stay, vaccines, are they going to have a flu shot? Like, how are you feeling about that? Would they need to wear masks or stay away if they're ill? These are things that were often more of a conversation when in the heat of COVID, but still are actually really important, and maybe even if it's nice outside, would you rather see certain people outside versus inside? Make a list of who might be able to come and prioritize who's going to be the most helpful. Asking them ahead of time, asking the helpers ahead of time, hey, I'm thinking that you could come around this time. What are your expectations around them coming? How are they going to help? How much? Where they're going to stay? When they're allowed to come, or when you want them to come? It's also really good to set time limits for more of the visitors, right? Maybe people that are not really going to be super helpful, but they, want to see the baby and you want to see them. You can just say, hey, like, how about you come over from 1 to 2 o'clock? And then you set that end time so that people don't overstay. And maybe even asking people each time that somebody's going to come, even if it's just like your non-helpful friend, maybe they could grab some groceries for you, or just grab, something that you need on the way, or maybe empty your dishwasher while you're there. And then you can even make a little list of to-dos that you could keep somewhere to remind yourself that when someone's there might be a little task that they could help you accomplish.
I love this because I did not do this at all. I love the idea that you're like, yeah, a friend's going to come visit and you might have them empty the dishwasher, which is one of my very least favorite tasks of all household tasks.
Mm-hmm.
And I maybe I'm like this with a lot of people, or maybe a lot of people are like this, but I ended up having people sit down, they held the baby, and then I was getting drinks and snacks for the guest. Right. And it never even occurred to me to be like, hey, we really could use some milk. Do you mind picking some up? Like, if they're there recognizing the huge task of bringing in, especially if it's a first-time parent, of learning to deal and raise a baby and have a baby, like just the understanding of like, oh my gosh, I have this baby now, I have to keep it alive. Just to have somebody bring a simple thing, it never occurred to me to ask. So I love that you're putting it out there because it really can make things a little easier.
Totally. And you can even people might want to buy you a gift card, or they might say something like for food delivery or whatever. But actually you can even make lists of your top groceries, like your grocery essentials or your food delivery preferences. Hey, these are some things I would like at an Italian restaurant or at a sushi place. This is my order. And that person can just order it for you and take away the 10 minutes it might take for you to decide and input what you need to order something for delivery. It's actually really helpful to have a few of those kinds of things set up.
That's really smart. So let's pull back to something that you said in your original list, relationship prep. So I think we all know that having a baby will change the dynamics of a family and relationship. So how can parents proactively plan for this change and prioritize keeping their relationship strong, as well as recognizing the additional tasks and responsibilities that parents need to be addressing?
Totally. And this is something that I think is really forgotten, because people will say, my partner is amazing and they're going to be so great. And that challenging relationship stuff is definitely not going to happen to us. Right. And then it does. So my top thing is for each person to make a list of the things that they love or need to do for their relationship. So what is something you really love about the relationship? Is it your weekly date nights? Is it going out to dinner or making dinner together? Then you come together with your lists and you discuss it. And then maybe you pick 1 or 2 priority items that feel like the most important. How can we continue this, right? And even later down the line, as an example for myself, one of the things, my husband and I were together for a really long time before we got married and had a kid, was even longer. And we really valued travel. And obviously travel was really hard with a new baby, but just, coming together and saying how can we make travel happen, because that was such an important part of our relationship.
How did you? I'm just curious. How did you? Because I love traveling, and we definitely put a damper on it since having kids. Our travel is just, we go to Florida, maybe go to an island. We just went to the Canadian Rockies, which was a big trip. How did you keep traveling with a child?
Well, it was a little different than we expected, because, you have, even as a midwife, you have this babies are so portable and easy. Well, we didn't take into account for the fact that our child hated the car. Hated the car. So we had a hard time even driving an hour, which was really hard. Once we figured out it's so silly, but actually what the secret was for us, I think, was actually those little mirrors that you put in to see the rear facing car seat.
Yeah.
You put like a mirror there.
Uh-huh.
We went on a trip to Florida when our kid was a year and a half. So this is how long the car was miserable, basically. And we didn't bring the mirror with us, and she was fine. And we were like, oh my God. She was annoyed because she could see us. And then we took away the mirror and she couldn't see us, and she fell asleep. And we were both floored. So we didn't do much travel before that. And then we figured out that secret, and 2 months later, COVID happened.
Oh,
no. Yeah, that was literally January of 2020. So then we didn't travel. We actually always talk about how lucky we are, in the sense that our child was COVID, that height of COVID was really, really hard for parents. But of all the time to miss traveling, wasn't so bad. We had a 1.5-year-old when COVID hit. And then, kind of at the end of, she turned 2 at the end of 2020. So we actually missed some of that kind of miserable travel time, which that sounds bad to say. Miserable is a strong word, but basically it can be really tricky to travel with a 1 to 2.5-year-old who is really just wants to be mobile all the time and doesn't really listen or and doesn't sit still for even an iPad, so we missed that. So I can't give you that. But what I can say is that we just did, once everything passed and settled, we just did it, and we did it relatively regularly. And actually, I think travel or anything, I think the key thing is to do it regularly. For example, even going out without your baby, if you do it and then you don't do it for 3 or 4 months, it's just going to be really hard again. So just trying to start it and keep doing it. And it doesn't have to be for a long time. This is another really good, important relationship thing, is that 10 or 15 minutes of a walk to get a coffee is still something, where you're just not with the baby. And people say, well, the baby is so easy and portable and I can take them anywhere. I was like, yes, but you also are then holding them. You might get spit up on or pooped on. Babies are unpredictable. So if you can have that time where their baby is not present, even if it's only 15 minutes, that's something that will really help rejuvenate your relationship.
Yeah, my husband and I still do just a walk around the block at times, just because we haven't seen each other all day, and my kids are older, and so I can leave them by themselves. And we're like, okay, we're just taking a quick walk around the block. It's just nice to reconnect, because I think it's very easy to just be on kid conversation. And when it's just the two of us, it just gives us an opportunity just to hear about each other's day without someone perhaps running by screaming about something. So it's just the two of us. Well, let's talk about recognizing that once baby comes, there are a ton of new additional tasks and responsibilities, because I think that in itself can also feel overwhelming and stress and strain the relationship. How do you suggest parents address all of that new stuff?
It can be a lot. I think setting expectations, talking about it, partners might say, I don't know what to do. How can I help? I'll help. Or I can't feed the baby if somebody is exclusively breastfeeding. But even if you're exclusively breastfeeding at the breast, your partner can literally do everything else, right? There's a long list: change, swaddle, soothe, walk them around, all of those things. So just kind of keeping that in mind. And I actually think another really big part of the task thing is everybody is more cranky when they're tired. And trying to, in the first few weeks, I think it's actually really important, especially for mostly for first-time parents now, first time parents, one kid, they are probably going to both be waking up for each feed and helping each other. But don't do that forever. Like, I've seen somebody at their 6-week visit who was like, yeah, we're still both getting up at every single feeding. What? No, don't do that. Try to help each other. How can you maximize your sleep? How can you trade off, right? How can it be so that you can get a little more sleep? Maybe you do wake up with the baby, you feed the baby, but then the baby's really fussy or something. Then you take that time and you walk them around and you let your partner sleep. And then the next time, you switch off. And even if you're exclusively breastfeeding, you could at least feed the baby and then give the baby to your partner. But I think trading off and helping each other get sleep is really important. Knowing that if your relationship feels like it's strained, it's very common. Often talking about it, right, with each other, trying to go back to like what we were before. How can we communicate? What do I need? But knowing that if it feels beyond that, finding someone to help, like either talking to somebody like a mental health professional yourself or as a couple can be super helpful.
Those are good suggestions. So similarly, what are your suggestions for not losing oneself as a person and not just suddenly becoming a parent in this transition?
Right. So just like I said, making that list. I like lists, I guess, but really like make a list of the things that you love to do for self-care or that you need, right? And maybe again, then picking those 1 to 2 priority items. So in this case, you're talking about like exercise, meditation, long showers, needing quiet alone time, seeing friends, and then try to stick to what you can do, right? And in the first few weeks, again, the first few weeks are always the most hard. Like the first 2 weeks are really a lot, or even longer, depending on the person. But once you get into sort of a routine and a groove, you can figure this out. And remember that maybe you require like a couple, maybe your pre-baby self would want to exercise 5 times a week for 30 minutes. But then, and you're just disclaimer, this is like after you're sort of cleared to exercise, not at 2 weeks, like you said. But, maybe your exercise just looks different. Maybe you're only going to get 10 or 15 minutes, maybe 2 times a week. And that's going to be okay, setting that expectation, but just trying to hold on to that piece of yourself that was really important. And take some alone time as early as you can, even 10 minutes to just like walk around by yourself or have your partner take the baby out for 10 or 15 minutes so you can be alone. Because it's good for a parent, especially the birthing parent, to get used to not having the baby with them. I will say I loved being pregnant, which I know not everybody does, but I liked it. And I always say that one of the reasons was because I like loved having my like little friend with me.
Aww.
My baby was with me all the time. I know. Yeah. Very cute. Right. But that made it really hard for me to leave her. And I think that in order to kind of keep my own self and that identity of not just mom or parent, I really should have taken a little time for me much earlier than I did. So don't make that mistake. Don't be me.
I had a student tell me, because I always love when they come back for postnatal yoga, and we had a student that came back, I think it was last week, and I ended up riding the subway down with her later. And she told me that one of the things that she said something similar with her husband about what she needed to feel like herself was just to have time alone to read. And I'm like, oh, I like that. And I said, well, I remember doing a ton of reading while I was breastfeeding. She's like, no, I do that too, but I'm breastfeeding. She's like, but what helps me is that my baby is with my husband and I have a book in my hand and I am reading, and that makes me feel better. And I'm like, that is brilliant. So I love the idea of people thinking what helps them reconnect themselves and carving that time out. And I never would have thought reading a book, but if that's what does it for you, that's definitely, it's relatively easy to plan. So I just wanted to share that one little tidbit because it surprised me.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about PMADs. And I'm not going to, I know this is not, you're not a psychologist or therapist, but you are a midwife who works a lot with new parents. So I know that you've seen this. What are some ways that the partner can be keeping an eye out for PMADs? So let me describe what that is: perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, and the general mental state of the birthing parent.
Yeah, I mean, I think people often think about postpartum depression, right? But actually, postpartum anxiety is a big thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's important is, obviously, some people are really in tune with themselves and they can say, like, this is something is wrong. But a lot of people are not, or they're stubborn and they don't want to admit or ask for help. And so having, like you said, having the partner be on the lookout is really important. And I counsel people on this as well. So one thing I mention is, like, is this person fully not themselves? Like, do you never see that they're like, or they're very rarely themselves anymore? Maybe they're just feeling really down or really anxious all of the time. That's not typical for them. That's kind of a thing to look out for. Looking out for, like, feelings a certain way more than 50% of the time, right? Well, maybe you see, like, glimmers of, like, oh, I feel, like, happy and I'm laughing in the same way, but really, like, most of the time that person is feeling really, really down and crying a lot or not wanting to take care of themselves. That's something to pay attention to. Also, situational, so in the case of anxiety, situational anxiety versus thinking about that outside of the situation. And one of the other midwives in my practice was the one who came up with this example, which is when you're walking up the stairs holding the baby and you're feeling, like, anxious, like, oh my gosh, what if I dropped my baby? That's like situational, okay? You're walking up the stairs and, like, that's okay. Like, sometimes people feel that way, right? Especially with a new baby. It's not normal to be thinking about that when you're laying in bed. Right. So just kind of keeping an eye on those differences. Are you in the situation or are you constantly worrying about something when it is not in that actual situation? And if any of these things are happening, asking for help early. In our practice, obviously, we would talk about, like, letting us know, like, how can we help? And I think our clients know that about us. Unfortunately, in a lot of larger practices or larger, where people there's many different providers and they don't really know their provider that well,
Mm-hmm.
you can definitely reach out to them, but it may not give you as much support as you would need or want. So, kind of taking matters into your own hands. Don't necessarily wait, like, oh, I'm not going to see my OB until 6 weeks postpartum. Don't wait. Please don't wait.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, look into this, like, try to find someone to help you early. And there's lots of good resources for that.
Well, that helps me actually transition to my next question, because I was thinking about the importance of having, like, an emergency list. I remember back when, I'm going to totally date myself, back in the day when phones were on a wall. My kids have actually never seen that. My mom used to have an emergency list, like neighbors, police department, like things that we might even not think of now. So what emergency or extra support contacts should be on their kind of emergency tape to the wall list?
Well, I think you can still have it taped to the wall list. Like, it'll actually be helpful for the future. Maybe, like, when you've got a babysitter or somebody visiting or whatever, right?
Okay,
It's
like
not
that.
bad to have that. I have this, like, little thing on my fridge. It's not very comprehensive, but it exists. I think mostly, like, your pediatrician. I think it's really important to remember also, you would be surprised. Your pediatrician is 24/7. Everybody should know this. The office may not be open 24/7, but if you call the office after hours, somebody is going to call you back. There is a way to get in touch. Okay. So please remember that. You would be surprised at how many people don't really know that. The same with your OB/GYN, which most people do know that because obviously they have to call when they're in labor, but your OB provider is helpful. And so that's a good number to have. God forbid, right? You had some kind of emergency with you where your bleeding was really heavy or something, somebody might want to find your partner might need that number, right? Also, it's helpful to figure out your sort of nearest emergency room or hospital where you would go for both yourself and also for the baby, right? Which those two things may not be the closest hospital to you. They might be a different hospital, like as long as you're not having a dire 911 emergency, but you need to go to the hospital, you might not go to your hospital across the street because maybe it's not your favorite place. So, but picking that ahead of time and like having that written, right? Like if baby needs hospital, this is the ER to go, right? Or if I do. Or in the case of maybe you want to go back to where you had your baby, right? That might not be the closest hospital either. And then maybe even just having like emergency numbers for neighbors or family if you need them.
Well, I also want to add IBCLC, like you mentioned earlier, having them on the list would be helpful. And I'm going to forget the website, but I think it's postpartum.net for a PMAD emergency. Do you know if that's the right one? I can look it up and make sure it's the right one. But for mental health, I want to add that too, because that kind of made me think of the question we talked about earlier about PMADs. In New York, we've got the Motherhood Center, which is really great. So I think those could be on the list too. But I love that you're still taping it to the wall.
Totally. I mean,
yeah.
A little thing, but like those kinds of true emergency contacts. I think, like you said, there's like also this sort of short list of things, right?
Yeah.
And yes, you're right. It is the Postpartum Support International is postpartum.net, which has a phone number.
Oh, actually. Really? I didn't know that.
Yes,
okay.
For emergencies. And it's right there on their website. But that could be helpful. The other thing, actually, going back to mental health in the same line, is that if you have a history of mental health illness, maybe you have a history of anxiety, depression, or being on medications, things like that, it can be helpful to have that care established ahead of time, right? Yeah, I mentioned a short list, but actually I would say go so far as to say establish care with a provider ahead of time so that you're not trying to find a new person, wait for an appointment, et cetera, if all of a sudden you really need medication or something.
This has been so helpful that I'm hoping people that are kind of hovering around, they're not even hovering around the due date, this should be done before, start to feel like, okay, I have a bearing on what's to come. Because just as we say in pregnancy, one way to help the fear of birth is to educate yourself about it and be prepared. So one way to help this transition, same thing, educate yourself and be prepared. I really love everything that you mentioned. Okay, we're going to take one final break, but when we come back, what is one final tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer new and expectant parents? And you can use your experience as a midwife, you can use your experience as a parent, whatever you want. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. So we're back. So what is one final tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer new and expectant parents?
Sure. Don't ignore the postpartum preparation. This period of time is the longest, but often is the one that's the least prepared for. So have conversations about it. Buy the supplies, find the support. We mentioned these short lists and things. Considering support for paid and unpaid, by the way, right? So we didn't talk about that yet, but like family versus like, maybe I need to hire a cleaning person, right? And then set your expectations with your partner. A lot of people are going to say, oh, we're just going to see how it goes, or just see how the baby is, or we're just going to wing it, or it's going to be fine. But honestly, those people have a lot of struggle, and there's no most of the time, there's no true way to fully prepare, right? Like for any of this, like you can study, you can read the books, you can take the classes, and you can have the people, and still things are going to come at you and in a way that you don't expect it. But at least you've done the sort of research and gotten some of that knowledge base to kind of know what to expect.
Yeah, this is great. Where can people find your work?
So we are located in New York City on the Upper West Side, like you said, around the corner from the Prenatal Yoga Center, which is our office is on 73rd and West End. We are called Central Park Midwifery. We have obviously a website, and we're also on our social medias, on Instagram and Facebook and stuff. So at Central Park Midwifery. And we would love to see people in New York City for pregnancy care, birth, postpartum, right? That's all kind of like a package deal. But it's also important for people to know that we also do routine GYN care and preconception care and contraception and things like that. So anything that you would go to an OBGYN for, we basically do that too. And we have good relationships with others, of course, if we can't do something, something is more complicated.
Well, I will make sure your links are on our show notes so people can find you. Elaine, this has been really great. I love that you just so practically laid everything out because, like you said, we don't know how it's going to unfold. It's often a little complicated, but preparation can help with that a bit. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Deb. It's been great.
This has been an episode of Yoga, Birth, Babies, produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. You can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Periscope. I'm Deb Flaschenberg. Thanks for listening.
Shop Macy's VIP sale, going on now. Use your coupon or Macy's card and take an extra 30% off the latest fall trends from designers that rarely go on sale. And save 15% off skincare, makeup, fragrances, and more. Plus, shop fall specials for even more great deals on top brands at Macy's. Savings off regular and already reduced prices. Exclusions apply.